Thank you, Federico, and thank you to the hosts and sponsors. You all can't see. We do have a clock, actually, so we can see how we're doing. I had some slides. I don't know if they're... get those up in a moment. What I'll talk about is high-level risk management. In a way, it's how the international group, really the clubs collectively manage the highest level of risk for the major losses. And just echo a point that was made actually by Federico earlier. Ultimately, if you want to control your costs of insurance, the biggest variable you have, it's your own claims. That's another risk level. So I'm going to be talking about what happens with the very large losses. Here's 10 factors. I wanted to make a list. Why should ship owners take an interest in the high-level reinsurance? Some of these are very financial. You'd simply want to know that the clubs get the best value possible for cover. But there are political elements and there are time frames. And I'll pick out a few of these points, give you a few graphs, and try to leave some time at the end as well. I'll return to these points. So the contract, it is complicated. That's why, as Federico said, I won't go into the whole thing. If you wish to ever see the details and what layers and components make up this contract, I put the website address for the international group of P&I clubs. You can get these graphs. You can find quite lengthy explanations about how the contract is built up. And a few points. It's quite a high level of cover. You can see it's layered. You have a first layer that's a $500 million layer. That's where 2/3 of the premium are, because that's where historically claims have fallen. There is one claim that has now gone through the second layer and is into that third layer. And I don't have to tell you the name of that ship and what happened a bit up the coast from here. A few other points is this changes over time. The goal of the club, you see those lower layers, is the pool. We want to do that at cost. You want to have as many, you want a layer of claims that's quite active, a kind of burning layer, which is done by the clubs at cost. Once we go to the reinsurance markets, for the higher levels of cover, they of course will expect some levels of profit to be in their reinsurance, as is expected. And another feature that's just worth pointing out is there's that green block called 30% Hydra. That is a captive of the international group of clubs. So effectively, the biggest underwriter on the burning layer of this contract, exposed to the most risk, are the clubs themselves. And that's the way of trying to get value by retaining risk. And that's a point you will bear in mind with your own individual deductibles for your own lower claims, and we apply the same principle at the higher level. Consistency of pricing and value. Value is really key. That the international group has a reinsurance subcommittee. Every club has a representative. The first meetings to plan the next renewal started in March, a few days after the last renewal. And they continue through the year. We are commencing those negotiations now, so I won't speculate on what might happen, but a few points of this. This graph is across the bottom is years going back, quite a few years, back to '86. And the green shaded area, that's the value of insurance purchased. Above what we purchased, there's an overspill possibility, but we are buying a very high level of market cover. The red line, that is a cost per ton. World fleet has changed, and in addition to the cost per ton to the market, we have some other costs. We buy excess of loss war reinsurance, and we need to allocate premium to the group's own captive Hydra. But a point being that over time, we're trying to seek value and reasonably consistent pricing from the market. Oh, you won't be able to see that, the list of that, but that's a list of some of the participants on the international group contract. It's 18 of the world's top 25 reinsurance companies are on the contract. And to be able to fill up the contract and get that high level of cover, there are 90 reinsurance companies that participate. And it's worth pointing out a few things. One is getting paid. These are big liabilities, and it's essential to our system. And we have a lot of stakeholders, including governments and others. Very important that the level of security is high, and we can deliver, we can pay the claims we say we will. The other feature is, it relates directly to Mons Jakobsen's speech. He was talking about events that were coming on 13, 14 years ago that haven't been resolved yet. And that's quite common in P&I. Claims go on many years, either through litigation or technical difficulties of wreck removal. There are all sorts of reasons claims get paid many years after the policy year in which they were incurred. So having top-level security is very, very important. We spend a lot of time working on that. You want for ship owners, it's important that the contract and the reinsurance we buy on your behalf adapts to change. There's quite a few different types of change that it has to adapt to. It's a very dynamic purchase we make. First change, I don't know if you can read the numbers, but across the bottom, this is the amount of tonnage in the world fleet, which is declared to the international group, which shares in the cost of reinsurance. And since 2001, that fleet has doubled. So one of the big changes we have to make is being able to double the exposure effectively on the contract and still have an efficient purchase. There's ship technology, won't dwell on that. You know about changes in ships better than I do. It is shipping in the law conference, and so it is pointing out that one of the biggest changes the international group has to adapt to is new legislation. And I think there was a very good example when Mons talked about the prestige, that today's limit of cover would be dramatically higher, and clubs have adapted to that. That's factored into our reinsurance program. And this is a list of some of the laws that have come in the last decade. Some are conventions that they were triggered or enacted earlier, but states are slow to deposit their documents. Even this year, the HNS, Hazardous Noxious Substance Convention, has not yet come into force, but that is an example where the clubs have said we will issue blue cards, effectively a kind of anticipatory guarantee to support that convention. We do the same with the Bunker Convention. During 2014, the Athens Convention 2002, that came into force. We issue guarantees there. And it's not just pay to be paid. Once we issue that blue card, there are no defenses for that element that we've guaranteed. And it's quite important because governments rely on that. For your ships to call at ports around the world that, say, for example, have enacted the Bunker Convention, your ship doesn't call into a port unless it has that blue card. That blue card is supported in large part by this effective reinsurance purchase. So it's very important that we adapt to change and can adapt quite quickly. If we've gotten an effective purchase and we have the right limits and we've adapted to change, one of the things that becomes very important at ship owner level are the costs allocated fairly and equally? Are the types of vessels having the losses paying their share of claims? And again, you can go onto the International Group website and you can read the principles of allocation. But effectively, we don't try to anticipate what risk ships might bring. Many people would say the very large container ships today bring an interesting increase in risk, but their claims record so far doesn't show that on a 10-year basis. So we're trying to allocate cost on what has actually happened and what has been paid. And that does lead to debates because we have a very large set of incurred claims for passenger vessels who've had a larger increase. You have a tanker sector which has had an improving record over the last 10 years and now pays slightly proportionally more in premium than they've had in claims, for example. So each year, this allocation exercise is very important, and that's the dollar per ton you see debited to you by the clubs. So I've got my minute left, and just summarizing, I think there are very important reasons ship owners should follow what happens with the cost of reinsurance and managing that high-level risk. You want a large chunk of risks. Today it's up to $80 million claims allocated at cost. You want that shared by the clubs with no profit margin. You want to know that where we do buy reinsurance, that it's good value, that there's a process, boards are consulted, and we spend a lot of effort to negotiate that contract. And last year, for example, it meant the group's captive taking a significant portion of risk, 30% of the risk. You want change and adaptation, And that's a very important point, because there are a lot of unpleasant risks in shipping. And those risks get picked up by clubs, not because they're attractive risk, but because clubs are controlled by ship owners. And it's one of these ultimate features of P&I. Ship owners control whether the clubs adapt to these new conventions and take on these new risks. And so that's a very important element. And I'll just end, because I see we have had people from Italian government here, is that by the ability to get this high level of cover, governments do rely on the blue cards. We have supported international conventions and systems through this purchase. I will stop there.
Thank you very much. Chris, you've